Hey, it's Soul with another video, and today I wanted to talk about a certain change that happened in the most recent alpha build of the Battle for Azeroth. This was clarified by a post from Ian Hazzikostas, the game director for the World of Warcraft, shortly after this build came out, and I missed it in the news and I wanted to talk about it today. So here's what's going on. The throughput cooldowns, like DPS and healing cooldowns that you're used to using just kind of on the fly whenever you need to, or in preparation for, like, let's say, like a bloodlust or a burn phase, or like in PvP situations where you just need to like pop something on the fly. Those things are now going to be put on the global cooldown, which is like a 1 and some second short cooldown between the typical time that you use abilities. And there are some classes and specs that have many more of these abilities than others. Like I, as a protection paladin, the only DPS cooldown that I really care about is Avenging Wrath. It's just one. I pop it when I need to. Sometimes I'll pair it with a trinket if I have an on-use trinket. And also, to clarify, on-use trinkets are also going to be put onto the global cooldown. You won't just be able to macro everything into one button and just spam all that stuff and be good to go. Going forward, at least currently on the alpha, you're going to have to basically kind of prep your cooldowns, or just chain one after another. So what I'm going to do today, I don't have a script. I actually started writing a script and I just kind of threw that out. So instead, I'm going to just kind of ramble on for a bit on two sides of this issue. One is just one that is almost irrationally against this idea, and this represents a pretty wide sentiment of players, I think, that don't like this sort of change. So I'll wear that hat and talk about it. And then the other one, the other side, is I'll talk why this change feels like it might be necessary. I thought of, hey, maybe let me talk about why this change is good, but I don't think I can really come to the conclusion that yes, we really need this change, or this is a great change for the game. I don't think that's Blizzard's goal necessarily. I think it's more that this is a necessary change to curb certain problems and issues and so on and so forth. But overall, well, let me just get started. All right, deep breath. This sucks. It's really hard to come to terms with a change, with a big change that's coming like this, that's come over the course of well over a decade, when slowly, players and classes and specs, they've been getting more and more of these buttons to use to kind of prep like a 1-2 punch, or to in quick succession unleash like this furious combo or this burst damage. This feels like a really big nerf to overall burst damage in WoW. The term that I see a lot of people using is the word clunky, and I think that this is one of those times where I think that word feels appropriate. Where, I mean, if you think thinking about myself as a protection paladin, maybe it's not so bad because I only have like one cooldown, maybe two if I happen to use Seraphim as well. But there are other classes that just feel very weird, or they would feel very weird if they happen to have all of their typical DPS cooldowns now put on the global. I do dabble in a few of the other classes. For example, like a Beastmaster Hunter, they have several cooldowns that typically kind of chain together, like Aspect of the Wild and some of the other cooldowns. I forget the names off the top of my head, but you pop those things at once and then you unleash madness for a little while. And the thing is, some of these cooldowns, they're reduced by a couple of seconds when you hit other abilities. So these cooldowns are actually a little bit shorter than normal, and it would feel pretty jarring to now have to kind of pace yourself. Blizzard does know that feelings are going to be mixed. Ian said so much in that forum post. What makes this frustrating is that the scale of butthurtness is going to vary between the classes and specs. Like for me, it's not that big of a deal, but it is something that I'm going to feel. For other classes, it's going to feel like it ruins everything. And Blizzard did say, oh, we don't want to do like a big class revamp except for like certain classes that need help, and that includes, off the top of my head, Demo Warlocks, Survival Hunters, Discipline Priests, and so on. But they didn't want to do like a full revamp. And yet here we go with doing this whole change to the global cooldown. And in order to meet that, Blizzard did say that they wanted to possibly change the duration of some of these cooldowns to compensate. But it I don't know, it kind of makes it feel like there's not that big of a difference, except for the fact that things are just going to feel a little bit slower for some of these classes who are more dependent on popping these DPS cooldowns. One of the big pluses of the World of Warcraft that I see and hear a lot of players say is that it feels very impactful whenever you press a button. You hit a button, it does something. In the case of DPS cooldowns, you hit those buttons, and on your next attack, you're gonna feel pretty awesome. What Blizzard is trying to do is to take these buttons that make us feel awesome and make us as players feel compelled to do one thing, and then the other thing, and then the other thing, and then you're awesome. At least for as long as whatever time you have left. It makes that moment when you hit that burn phase or you start the pull where everyone is just like glowing and going nuts and there's just flashes going all over the place and the damage just really ramps up, and you know, you're racing along with your counterparts trying to hit that top of that burst meter, and part of that feeling is good. There's a good number of players that share that sentiment, that they just like that feeling of feeling powerful for those moments, and having to ramp that up, kind of similar to, like, I don't know, maybe an affliction lock or something like that. That doesn't feel as good. I'm not very fond of the change, and I think that if things stay as they are, going through the alpha into the beta and like raid testing, we're really going to start feeling that. And there are multiple alternate solutions to making something like this work, but still give players that sort of feeling that they can pound all these buttons and still feel pretty good. Rebalancing the number of cooldowns that these specs have could be one thing. Approaching this as a case-by-case scenario as opposed to just kind of taking a hammer. I mean, that's what it feels like. It's like they need to kind of focus on and zero in on specific pain points where their concerns are, but instead they're just using a hammer. I'm sure that there is a lot more than I can complain about, and each individual person that represents their certain class and spec will be able to speak to that. But now let me move on to why this might be a necessary approach for Blizzard to take. This is a generalization, but there are two kinds of DPS in the World of Warcraft. There's Burst DPS, which is mostly what we're going to address, with popping your cooldowns and maximizing your damage within that small period of time. And then there's the Sustained DPS, which is basically everything else while you're waiting for these cooldowns to come up. I think that in this conversation there's more to talk about than just what Ian had said in the few examples that he gave. So I want to talk about, really quick, just the prevalence of burst DPS as opposed to like the sustained DPS that we need to keep up, regardless if we're doing PvE or PvP combat. Lining up your cooldowns and using them at the appropriate time and using them together, all that stuff is extremely important. But I think we might be coming to a point where it is too prevalent, where it is too much of the make or break in WoW. Cooldowns are what kind of sharpens the edges of each of our classes and specs, but I think it's doing a bit too much to define us as well, maybe. Now, putting these DPS cooldowns on the global doesn't quite solve that problem, but it sort of dulls, maybe refines that edge a little bit, but I guess I shouldn't be using analogies here. For a spec or a class like mine that only has 1 or 2 cooldowns, like I said earlier, it's not going to be as impactful for me. I'm just going to pop my Avenging Wrath, and then once that global cooldown slowly makes its way over, then I can start to unleash hell. In my opinion, the solution wouldn't be to rebalance DPS cooldowns among all the classes and specs and effectively start pruning cooldowns, because I think that would be, I don't know, maybe that would be worse. I think the stigma of removing some of these DPS cooldowns really wouldn't sit well with some of these players that just enjoy having those buttons to press. So instead of taking away some of this class identity, they're still preserving it. It's just that the way you go about it is going to be a little bit different. And there are some suggestions that I've been seeing here and there on how to possibly do that. So for example, Beastmaster Hunters, they have Aspect of the Wild. So you pop that has a certain duration to it, but during that duration, if you happen to also use your Bestial Wrath, that's going to increase the duration of your Aspect of the Wild by a number of seconds, which kind of makes up for what had happened. So I think something like that I think it would make it feel slightly better. Something like that will feel a lot more tactile than just increasing the duration, so that you kind of reduce the overlap. That way the perception of a player will be like, okay, cool, I still get the full duration of both of these abilities that I'm using if I happen to use them in tandem. And then even as a standalone cooldown, the duration of it can last like just slightly longer to make up for the global, I don't know. So while this whole change may still not feel good, it can feel slightly better than what we're seeing right now with this first iteration. I think that it would be kind of cool if I happen to pop Seraphim, and then when I pop my Avenging Wrath during that duration, it adds another 5 seconds to my Seraphim. I'm sure people are going to fight me on this, but I would almost argue that that feels a little bit better, or at least it feels slightly more fulfilling than just have everything macro to a single button, and then I pop everything at once, and I'm like, okay, cool, I'm good for these number of seconds. I have all these little dazzling effects around me, and then it's over, and then I just kind of feel flatter than I was before. So those are just my initial reactions to something like this. My hopes are that over the next couple of builds, Blizzard kind of refines their thoughts on this, and they're reflected, so we can actually test more of this stuff out. Because right now during the testing, it didn't feel all that great for me, and I'm sure it's not going to feel. I'm sure it's going to feel so much worse for other people. So that was my attempt at kind of arguing one side or the other. I mean, overall, this is a pretty, a kind of uncomfortable change that's happening in WoW. And so far, like I said, I don't feel very good about it. My hopes are that over the next couple of weeks and months or so, that things will change, or Blizzard will just be like, you know what, we tried it and we hear you, and we just decided to change everything back and we'll do something else. We've seen changes be reverted before, but not so much something as global as this, but we'll just have to wait and see and keep giving feedback. Anyway, thanks for watching and listening, and I'm sure that there are plenty of things that you have to say to totally contradict what I have to say, or just tell me that I'm flat out wrong. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I still wanted to share my thoughts, so I encourage you to share yours too in a comment below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.